But I have another question for you. So, for what percent of U.S. adults was their last formal mathematics learning experience negative? And then compare it to history or English or literature. Do you think the percentage is higher or lower? So I want you to get into your first breakout groups. This is be a short one, about 3-minute conversation about. So you come back with a percentage, and I need somebody to tell me what the percentage is, and then compare it to other disciplines.
Who wants to give a guess?
I'd say it's in the 80 percentile.
I'm saying 95.
You want me to close the room?
Yeah, ready to close the rooms, Pam. That would be great.
Okay, they're closing.
I'm thinking it's in the 90s.
And I think it's higher than any of those other subjects, obviously. Yep.
Although I must say, you're looking at the girl who art was not the art teacher that was jam.
Okay, so let's hear from high school first. Someone from high school, tell us what
I think we're almost ready for people to come in, Kanita. There's 46, so they're gonna.
It takes them a minute to all come back, Kanita, from the breakout. It's not instantaneous.
Yeah. Listen as Kanita gets the question, and that way we'll be able to hop in right as folks are ready. So, Kanita, what was it you wanted to hear from?
I want to hear from high school first, and we'll go in reverse order: high school, middle school, and then elementary.
Okay. All right. Here they come. There we go. All right.
Okay, so let's hear from someone from the high school. Tell us what your percent is, and is it higher or lower than other subjects?
So we actually, I'm from Jefferson County, and we had a mix between high school, middle, and elementary in our group. But also from the perspective of, I used to be an adult educator, we said about 70%.
Okay, all right, thank you. How about middle school, someone?
Our group is built of middle school and elementary, but we also, I think we settled on the number 74%. We definitely felt strongly that the percentage would be higher than for history, for sure, and most likely art and literature.
Okay, let's hear from one more group. The groups are missed, so just hit one more group.
We did 90%. We discussed it, and we felt it would be really, really high, like 90%. We were worried that it might even be higher than that.
Well, do you really want to know?
No, I don't think so.
Oh!
Wow.
Gosh.
Oh my gosh, my partner was right. She said 90. She said, I bet it's like 98%.
So,
I told you, Mindy. I told you.
So quickly, thoughts on this. How do you feel about this? What are your...
Well,
I believe that one thing I would say that I think it's also cultural and social based as well.
I feel like students who speak from Ballard, just in my experience.
Someone was breaking up there. We didn't hear that.
My thought was, going back to my own school experience, is that in math, kids got separated really early, even if they did it to themselves, based on who was good at math and who wasn't good at math. And I don't know where that came from, but you either had this self-perception that you just weren't good at it, and there was that one kid who was brilliant at it, and then I think it put barriers up to getting any better. At least that's what my perspective.
We'll discuss some of those barriers later. Thank you. All right. So when we were writing the book, the question was why? Why catalyzing change? Why now? And so if you look across, this is 4th grade, this is elementary and 8th grade. Look at the test scores. You see there's an improvement. If you draw a line, it will be an increasing line. So there's an improvement. in both elementary and at the middle school. Look at the high school. You don't see that at the high school. It's kind of stagnant at a high school. So that's why we went with the high school first when we wrote the book, and then went back and did the middle and elementary because of this. Mhm. So look at the elementary, right? You see very early, kindergarten, first grade, those are strong indicators of the success they'll have in mathematics. Mhm. But one of the problems is there's too much emphasis on memorizing, too much emphasis on number facts, and not on developing conceptual understanding. And then last but not least, look at who you're reaching. I think someone mentioned this, is reaching too few students. I remember in my class growing up, I was one who excelled in math, but the other ones weren't. They didn't excel in math as much, and so you wonder why are they marginalized. Right. Look at the middle school. Mhm. Mathematical identity. Do you know your students' mathematical identity? Have you thought about that? What about that agency? What are you doing to improve their mathematical agency? Mhm. And all across the board, we need to be instituting equitable and providing high quality learning opportunities. What kind of opportunities are you providing for your students? Right. So these are some questions that you should ask yourself. Mhm. And at the high school, we noticed that some of our standards, the elementary and middle schools have it together a little bit more on the standards. Our standards in mathematics at the high school level are not as focused as they are in the middle elementary. And then because of the sheer amount, because I taught high school for years, we have so much to do, we couldn't get to that depth, couldn't get to that level of rigor. And if you try, which I tried to do, then I didn't cover everything. And so it's like a double-edged sword. Mhm. Mhm. So that's why we have those 4 recommendations. And today we'll focus on mainly 3, but I want to talk about, you can't really talk about 3 without talking about 2. So,
I
so
think,
first, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that there's that crust in math that we have to, you were talking about going into the depths. I think we have to bust through that crust and get through to the kids that, you can learn math, and then even get to the parents that, okay, we're going to use these concepts now to teach not only the students, but if you didn't learn it, you can go through this with us and help us. And we have to bust through that crust of that stigma of I can't do math.
You're exactly right. I remember when I was teaching geometry, I taught in an alternative high school, and the students used to say, well, my mom wasn't good at math and I'm not good at math. And I would say, stop, just stop. That is not an excuse. It's not hereditary. Oh my gosh. And so, sorry about that. I told her that I lost my train of thought. The phone threw me off. Yes, so she said her mother didn't do well in math, but I'll say, stop. You can do well in math. It doesn't matter what your mother did, doesn't matter what your father did or your grandmother. We can learn math. This is in you. I told my students, and I was probably partial because I taught a lot of students who look like me. And I said, look, our ancestors built the pyramids. Look how much trigonometry was involved in that. So we can do this. So this stuff is in you, and it's up to me to pull it out of you. And so I just went, approached it that way. All right. So before we talk about equitable practices, equity, and I know you talked about equity in your groups, but there are a lot of definitions out there about equity, and so one of my favorites is Gutierrez, not being able to predict student success or achievement based on characteristics such as their race, their ethnicity, their gender, because as far as females, we're not supposed to do well in math. That's always been, so people were always surprised that I was African American, I was female, and I did well in math. So I just tried to break all the rules, and so that we can do well in math. And I was kind of biased full disclosure, when my girls, I really pressured my girls and I was encouraging because I knew what the stigma was. I knew that, the society saw us as not being able to do well in math. So I really, really encouraged my girls. I didn't discourage the guys, but I was really encouraging the females because they didn't get that. I wanted them to have that support there. And then the National School Board said that all students should receive what they need so they can graduate prepared. And so we want all of our students to be prepared for graduation for the next level. So I like this chart because it compares all 3 levels based on the recommendations. And so I just like that chart I want to show you. So we're going to delve into equitable structures. So I think you have this question already. I think I sent this question a couple weeks ago. But if you just look across the board, what do you notice across the board from elementary, middle, and high as far as creating equitable structures in mathematics? Just 1 or 2 comments. What do you notice? Let's hear from the elementary groups. You notice any common
Get
out?
rid of the ability grouping? Is that what I'm saying?
Tracking,
No,
ability grouping.
ability grouping and equitable structures seems to be a pattern.
Anything else?
Tracking.
Tracking, yes.
Grouping.
Grouping, ability grouping, yes. So, and I gave you an article to read, Less is More, right? So what I want you to do, so this is our second breakout group. I'll give you 5 minutes here because I want you to discuss the article, Less is More, and discuss this question: what support structures need to be dismantled or disrupted? What policies, what procedures that limit students' access to high quality mathematics? All right. Okay, so let's hear some of your conversations. Let's start with the middle school. Someone from middle school report.
I will go. This is Kelly Simpson from Marion County Knight Academy. We are an 8-9 center. One distraction that we have had since we've been back has been fire drills and tornado drills, lockdowns, which I totally get. We have to go over those things for safety reasons. But it just always seems to happen with my group that needs me the most. So that's just a little disheartening. It's a little bit out of my control. And then I have another type of distraction. I have a student who has to get his mental health checked every day at a certain time. And it just happens to be towards the middle end of my class. And I see him just like struggling and falling behind. And, I don't want him to miss something every day, and me feeling like I'm playing catch up all the time and, feel like I'm, cramming a lot of stuff at him because that's not fair either. So those are just some distractions at the middle school level.
I have a question. Why do kids who need to have their mental health checked and all of these things have to be pulled out of core classes? Why can we not schedule that as in their related arts time or at their lunch time or things like that? Because I deal with it too. Kids get pulled out for OT or speech, and I'm not saying these things aren't important, but there are other times during the day that are less important than my math class or an English class or even a social studies or science class. A child could be pulled out of, and I'm not saying it's not important, PE or during lunch to do these kind of things. Why is it that they find it acceptable to pull them out of core classes.
Who makes those decisions?
I think as far as my school is concerned, because I put it in the chat that sometimes you can address it with the admin team. Sometimes they're just unaware of kids being pulled out at certain times. And so if you bring it to their attention, then they are the head start of trying to work out a different schedule. Another thing that also is what Sean just said. It's when the resources are available to come into the schools. It's not that they're pulling the kids out of those core classes. And sometimes it just takes you as the teacher speaking to that individual. I've done that as well. When they come to the door, because they know Miss Epps, and I give them that look, and they'll be like, is this safe? Is it okay to pull them out of class right now? And sometimes if this, you build that relationship with those resources that come into the building, they're more than, they're 99.9% more than willing to work with you as long as their schedule allows them to be flexible. And so it can work out, but you gotta let them know you can't take my scholar out of class. And so, it always works out when you can just talk to them and they'll do it. At least in Jefferson County, that's been my experience.
I totally agree with that. The only thing that, and I've had this happen a lot too, and I feel those same frustrations. The only thing that I often think is that, until a child's emotional needs are met, they're really not going to be learning anyway. And so we know that with everything going on right now, if we can take a little bit of time up front to deal with those mental issues that they've got going, they're going to come back better, stronger, and more focused. We've all heard, and I think especially, the younger that a child is, they're not always able to advocate for their own mental health, their own well-being. Sometimes they depend so much on other people. And I'm like y'all, I do not want these kids out of the room, but I also know that until their mental health is taken care of, until they feel safe and fed and comfortable, they're not going to be learning anyway.
And with that, Whitney, it just builds rapport and relationship with your scholars anyway. And so
absolutely,
as long as they see that you care and you're allowing them that opportunity and that moment to just break away from math, is so much helpful in the long run. I love your point, Whitney. Yes.
Two things you pointed out. We have to be advocates for our students. And so you're being a good advocate when you speak to them about taking them out of your class. And even now with my students, before we start class, I do a mental health check-in every class before, and at the end of class too. So that's something that you can do in your classes as well. Make sure you check in with them with their mental health, right? So there's some hard truths that we have to face when it comes to equitable instruction. And one is, a lot of times what we do in math education reinforces these inequities more than try to eliminate them. So that's a hard fact. And so once we accept that, then we can move on to making those changes.
Can I add something on to that mental health conversation?
Yes.
And I'll be real quick, I promise. So when I do, this is Kelly again from Marion County. When I do that mental health check with my students, like I'll even say, like, this is what I put today. I put that today I'm a little tired, or today I'm a little stressed. So they realize too, like, it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. And that might cause me to be a little bit distracted today during math class. That just creates an open community and conversation that's a part of the learning process.
Thank you. All right. Great conversation. So I'm gonna have to fly through some of these PowerPoints here. All right, for these slides. So at the elementary level, so I'll briefly go through each one. We talked about the tracking, avoid tracking. We didn't talk about this, multiple forms of evidence. make sure you, and I know you do, I know I preach to the choir, but this is one thing that we can do to create equitable instruction is use multiple forms of evidence. And I get so angry when teachers, I asked one teacher one time, how do you know what your students know? He said, well, I haven't given them a test yet. And I said, there are ways to know what your students know without giving a formative test, a summative test all the time. So we have to use more formative assessments and analyze and enhance the alignment between the curriculum and the child's needs and interests. So look at the child's culture. Do you consider that culture when you're planning lessons? In middle school, all right? I really want to talk about this one. Stop using these deterministic labels because that has an impact on our students. And so take a look at this picture here. This is from Pollock. School talk, rethinking what we say about and to students every day. So look at this cartoon. She has this cartoon on page 32 of her book. And what comes to mind when you see this?
Pick a label.
This is Jennifer Hartzell. I'm from Harrison County, but a conversation we had in our breakout group, when I look at this, I teach kindergarten, and just how early these labels unfortunately start to creep in. I was sharing that this is my 10th year in kindergarten, and last year was the first time that we had a parent push for gifted and talented services for kindergartners. And she had older children and who had been in that program, and she felt like her kindergartner needed to be in the GT group. And we had to have some really honest conversations with, I had honest conversations with my principal in terms of my feelings on bringing these labels in at such an early age. It's really heartbreaking and frustrating.
So if you think about, thank you for sharing, think about the labels we use, the unintended things that we say, the consequences of those comments to our students and to the parents. Other thoughts on this?
One of the problems with labels that stick out to me is the fact that just because a student may be going through something at the time, or maybe that month, or maybe that year, doesn't mean that that's how they're going to be for the rest of their career. And when we label students as struggling and even talented, no matter what the label is, children change. Their minds are fluid. And so by putting them in those labels, it limits them in a lot of different ways. And then sometimes we put a student a little bit too far ahead, and we prevent other students from being able to grow.
True.
Yeah, I agree.
But
I think that sometimes when we label them, as gifted, oftentimes by the time they get to the intermediate end, they feel like they're at a level that, like y'all said, maybe they were there and now they're not, or they're not willing to push themselves anymore because when it gets hard, they just shut down.
Yes.
I
If
think
we would label everybody as gifted or advanced, we probably rock it out. Just tell them they all gifted and advanced kids and let them shoot for the stars. We be doing something in this country.
Absolutely.
I think the labels definitely have an impact on the kids, because I think what makes me the saddest here is it's the child at the table in this picture grabbing the label. And I'm in 6th grade, so kids are always coming new to the building, and they bring the labels, and they'll tell you the label they carry themselves. And I think that's disheartening, because we know a lot of really ugly conversations happen where adults use these labels, but these kids are catching wind of those labels somewhere along the way, and that's becoming part of their math identity. And I think that's the worst, because like Danielle said, if we could get them all to identify as gifted, think of how empowered they would be versus carrying that label of I'm slow, or, you know, I'm a failure, the different ones that are on there. I think that's the worst part to me.
There's a quote by Albert Einstein that says, if you judge, I think it's if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, you know, it'll spend its life thinking it's stupid. So that's what I always tell the kids, is not that quote necessarily, but I say, you know, if the first time that you tried to walk, if you fell down and then your family said, well, they're never going to be able to do this, I said, there'd be a lot of adults crawling. You know, just because you don't succeed the first time doesn't mean you're not going to. I think it's so important that, you know, setting aside those labels, but then also making sure that our kids know we're looking at them. You know, that's what I shared in my breakout group. I tell my kids all the time, I'm not comparing you to somebody else. I'm comparing you to you. If you're growing, I don't care at what rate you're growing. I just want you moving forward. You know, I think we've got to communicate that with our kids.
The other thing we need to communicate with, not only with our kids, is also our parents. I think the parents use the labels as a kind of a social, creating social circles. Well, my child's in the advanced class and your child is not. But that, you know, that worries me in this world, because every child needs to learn something every single day. It may not be math related, but, you know, if our parents are inflating this, well, my child's in the gifted class when they really don't need to be, then that can also be detrimental to our societies as well.
Yeah.
Brianne, when we were in our breakout group, and we were talking about the things that need to be dismantled, Ashley and I are both in Fayette County middle schools, and we're across town from one another. And while we were talking about the tracking that does exist, that came up. I work on an end of town where the opportunity hoarding is over the top. And I think there's a social piece to the labels and all of that. Whereas Ashley, on the other side of town, it's access to opportunities. And we can identify that inequity between our two populations, and then two huge barriers to dismantling and kind of breaking down that tracking piece.
Thank you guys for sharing. All right. So this is the last one. This is high school. Again, tracking across the board, elementary, middle, and high school. Tracking is a problem. So now, equitable instructions. So again, quickly look across, because I have these for all three. What do you notice briefly? I want you to say, just in your mind, just think about, what do you notice here? And then the question I have for you is, what partnership should be fostered for educators' professional learning to strengthen understanding of mathematics and equitable mathematics teaching practices? So you want to strengthen the understanding of mathematics, your understanding as a teacher, your understanding of mathematics, and the equitable teaching practices. So I wanted to put you in groups, but we are running short on time. So let's just do one or two comments here. What partnership do you think needs to be fostered here?
I believe the teachers need to be given more access, time, and opportunity to further their mathematics education, and also their study and ability to learn newer research-based instructional practices, as well as forms of curriculum and assessment, because that's somewhere where I can say specifically in my school that teachers struggle with, especially our teachers who have been teaching for a long time. They feel like the way of doing things is just the only way, and it limits students' access. It limits students' opportunities to be able to access material in new ways.
Okay, thank you. One other comment on this?
I teach in Carter County, and we have math academies once a month. We do it for 3 months. And all of the middle school math teachers and all of the high school math teachers gather for an entire day. And the instructional leaders go through and they teach us different strategies that they have seen in classrooms, that they've seen work. So through that day, we're working in stations, we're learning new teaching strategies, we're looking at what works, what doesn't work, and they also help us with vocabulary, because vocabulary seems to be the biggest thing in math that, you know, kids struggle with. So we also work on vocabulary strategies for our classroom.
That's so true. I was speaking to my students the other day about definitions. Definitions are important in mathematics.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that keeps coming to my mind when we talk about collaboration, the lady that is my counterpart on the other team, we've taught together for, this makes our 5th year together, and we have just now started to learn to collaborate together, and I think it's this virtual learning platform that we've been forced into. But our kids, not just our special ed kids or our gifted kids, but all kids in general are both going to, or all going to flourish, because they're not going to get just one perspective from one teacher. They're going to get multiple strategies from other teachers. She and I both have different chants, different songs, different ways of teaching things. And when we collaborate and create our videos and see that coming back to us through our screens, through her kids are doing my chants and my kids are doing her chants, I think the whole collaboration idea is going to foster better mathematicians in the next generation.
Good, thank you. All right. Last few minutes here. Mathematical identity and agency. So our identity, how your students see themselves as doers of mathematics. And agency, that's in action. All right, so here's some questions to ask yourself. How will you know that each and every student in your setting is receiving the highest quality mathematics instruction? How do you use lessons to empower your students? How are they asked to make connections among mathematical ideas? Do you provide time and different opportunities for them? At school level, at high school level, they provide 3 pages. It's it's a table that covers 3 pages, so that you take a look at that when you're looking. But I thought this was interesting. I found this today. I was been planning this for weeks, and I saw this: agency, mathematics, identity, and identity affirming. Those are interwoven. So think about that. Your student's identity, your student's agency, and then what are you doing to affirm those identities? How are you helping to affirm those identities, creating positive mathematical identities for your students? Just think about that for a moment. And finally, what is your mathematical identity? How do you see yourself as a doer of mathematics? How do you take up your role as a mathematics teacher of children? Because that's important too. Because a lot of times, I don't mean to pick on any group, but sometimes at some of the lower levels, lower grade levels, you have to teach every subject. And so mathematics may not be your favorite. And so I remember when I did professional development in middle school, and a teacher told me, if I'm not confident of the content, I'll just teach the rules. This is how you do it. Here are the rules. This is why. And so I spent like 2 weeks with her every day after school going over the content. She was doing reflections and rotations. She wasn't, so we acted out, we played, role play and everything until she was confident. And then when she taught the lesson, it was a much richer lesson for her students. And she taught at a deeper level because she was more confident of the material. So you need to, I would encourage you, not you need to, I would encourage you to reflect on these, on your identity, and notice your students' mathematical identities. And someone said something about the community. Community engagement is powerful. How can you engage your community in helping your students? How can you use funds of resources, your funds of knowledge in teaching?
Kanita, I've asked them to, I thought that the idea of doer of math was very important. And so I've written in the chat kind of for them to reflect on that for just a minute with regards to that.
And finally, I like to leave you with some action. So you've read these books, we've had conversations, we've had great conversations. Thank you for engaging in conversation with me. But now what? So what teaching practice and related equitable teaching practice did you select? So on that page in the high school book, select one of those practices. And then how can you begin tomorrow to implement that practice? Mm-hmm. And don't try to take on, oftentimes you try to take on too much, just choose one. Just choose one for now and work on that one. And then the last one, how will you determine its effectiveness? So once you do something, you want to know if it's effective. So you have to find some way to analyze, to evaluate yourself. And so I'll leave you with this. And I think, Kelly, you took a picture of this so they can have a copy. And I can give you my PowerPoint as well, so you can have that.
We'll follow this up with those questions. I think one of the most important things that we are here at Kentucky Math Teacher Leaders are action. Like these are the best math teachers in the state. And so tomorrow can be the day that we can begin making systemic changes. Yes. Based on what you're asking, what you've had us think about.
And so again, the book series is intended to initiate some conversations, and we've had some great conversations, and I thank you for that. So again, what will be your next steps, and what are our next steps? Because we're a community, so we need to do this and work together. So we must work
to see those next steps in the chat. I think we have a couple minutes that I know we're right at the end, but I know they don't mind staying on for just a minute. New voices, maybe some new voices who haven't shared. What are going to be your next steps starting tomorrow? Kanita tells us she'd have us do it in 5 minutes if we had kids in 5 minutes, but she's gonna let us off the hook. We can do it tomorrow.
So final comments, questions, concerns?
One thing I think that kind of sums up a lot of the things we've talked about today. Last year, I had a general algebra 1 class, and there was 33 of them. And every day I just told them how smart they were and how wonderful they were. And within the first month or so, they believed me, and their test scores were better. We went faster than the other classes. And it just came from me telling them that every single day. Oh, you guys are so smart. I can't believe you could do all this today, when it really wasn't any more than they should have been doing. But because I was telling them that every day, they believed me. And by the end, a lot of them really felt like they were pretty good at math, when really they were no better than anybody else in any of the other classes.
So you were affirming those positive mathematical identities. Very good. Other comments, questions?
I think more so this year than any other year, I want to instill in the students that it's okay to fail, and that many times you learn so much more from your failures than you really do from your successes. And this year, we're all facing so many unknowns and boundaries, and I have to tell myself that too, that like it's okay if something I try doesn't work. It's okay if the first day that we do something in class we don't succeed, just because kids learn a lot from failure and they're afraid to do it, and I don't want them to be afraid.
Some teachers, when they grade, they have my favorite mistake, and they'll put that up, and then they won't put a name to it, but then they'll talk about it and talk about how much they learned from that mistake. So you're right, we do learn from our mistakes. Anybody have an idea of what their next step will be? Not to put you on the spot, but have you been thinking about it? Well,
I will tell you something from the Kentucky Center for Math perspective, and that is that we we need to attend more to translating our materials so that all children can have access to them. So whereas we're one step removed away from the classroom, but our materials are so rich in and widespread for their use, it is long since time for there always to be at least a Spanish version. And we acknowledge that we need many more versions, but we limit access and have a structure that's a barrier when we don't do that. So this afternoon, I talked to Corinne in the NKU World Languages Department about it, and we need to put some money where our mouths are to make sure that our materials can be, become more open for all.
That's right. I remember a time there'll be two-sided, English on one side and then the Spanish on the other side, so that anybody, at least those two languages, if you read those two languages, you can access the information.
Well, Kanita, we thank you so much for guiding us today. We give you Kentucky props for leading this work, this national work. We're so excited. I do want to tell our folks this is step one with Kanita. She is, I've grabbed onto her. She's now a true Kentucky Center for Math friend and thought partner. That's what we say to her. Unique perspective, very important. I loved that. I love your stories that you tell about the voice of being, a woman who's out there, a woman of color, showing the modeling for the children around that it's absolutely, you can put anything you put your mind to. So we'll be working on our mathematical identities with children. We will be working to help them with their agency. You can see all of the beautiful comments in the comment bar there, Kanita. Okay. It's beautiful tonight, so we thank you.
Well, I thank you all for engaging in this conversation with me. It has to start with somewhere, and so we start with the conversation and then we carry it on through actions. So
you got it. So Sheila ends us, she says, you're right. Hashtag spiraling up. That's a mantra with us here at the Kentucky Center for Math and Kentucky Math Teacher Leaders. And I do want to tell our Kentucky Math Teacher Leaders, as classroom teachers, we know how hard you're working. I know that when I sent you 2 books in the mail and gave you the assignment to read the whole book, I know that was crazy and daunting. Give yourself mercy and grace. Continue to spiral back into that book. But I hope that tonight is a filler for you, fills your soul, and makes you excited to be a part of Kentucky Math Teacher Leaders, because the truth of the matter is you're the ones that make the changes in the classroom. Yes. So we thank you so much. See you guys.
bye. Thank you.
Kanita, thank you so much. Beautiful, beautiful.